You know, you sent over this really interesting literary quiz, just packed with details.
Hmm. Some intriguing names on there.
Exactly. And we thought, okay, instead of just, reading out answers, let's dig in a bit.
Yeah, use it as a jumping off point. See what connections pop up.
Right. So the mission today basically is to go beyond the Q&A format and pull out the really fascinating stuff hidden in the quiz you shared, find the links.
And looking through it, two main clusters sort of emerged, didn't they?
They did. First, there's Arthur James Balfour, the politician turned philosopher, which is interesting in itself.
Definitely a surprise for many, I think.
Hmm.
And then you've got E.M. Forster and some of his contemporaries.
Yeah, exploring the novel, social commentary, all that.
Exactly. So where should we start? Balfour.
Okay, let's dive into Balfour first. Like you said, most people probably know him as prime minister.
Right. Political figure, primarily.
But this quiz flags up his earlier work, A Defense of Philosophic Doubt, from way back in 1879, as a philosopher.
Yeah, and it made quite a splash at the time.
So what was the core argument there? What was he getting at?
Well, a key thing in that book is Balfour questioning how certain scientific knowledge really is.
Okay. Challenging science.
Sort of.
Yeah.
He was suggesting that even the basic ideas science rests on,
Hmm.
well, they need a certain amount of belief, almost like a kind of faith,
Ah, right. Things you can't strictly prove but have to accept to get started.
Precisely. So it wasn't just about empirical observation, things you can see and measure.
Yeah.
He was saying there's this underlying layer of belief, maybe.
Okay. So that set him up as a distinct philosophical voice then.
It did, challenging the sort of dominant scientism of the time.
And by empirical, we just mean knowledge from observation, from experience.
Yeah, exactly. And Balfour felt that wasn't the whole story.
So that questioning, that seems like it would lead into his later stuff, like Theism and Humanism in 1915. How did he build on it?
Well, building on that kind of skepticism about purely material explanations,
Right.
Theism and Humanism argues that our core human values, beauty, truth, goodness, they actually make more sense. They're more grounded if you look at them from a theistic perspective.
So belief in God provides a better foundation for these values than just science or materialism alone.
That was his argument, essentially, that these things we value point towards something beyond the purely physical.
Interesting. And then there's Theism and Thought in 1923. The subtitle is A Study in Familiar Beliefs. That sounds telling.
It is. He's looking at our everyday thinking, our common sense beliefs about the world.
Okay.
And he's arguing that the way we naturally reason, the assumptions we just sort of make, they actually fit better. They point towards a reality that isn't just material.
So the act of thinking itself, for Balfour, hints at something more.
Kind of, yeah. That our basic cognitive processes align more comfortably with a theistic view.
So for anyone listening, the key thing with Balfour is this really unusual blend, isn't it? Top-level politician, but also deeply engaged in these fundamental philosophical debates.
Absolutely. A thought-provoking take on science, faith, human values, all from someone who was also running the country.
Makes you wonder how those two sides of his life influenced each other.
It does raise that question, doesn't it? How often do people really bridge those worlds, politics and deep philosophy? And what happens when they do?
Food for thought. Okay, let's switch gears completely now. Let's get into E.M. Forster and the literary world.
Right, a giant of the novel.
The quiz kicks off with his very first novel, Where Angels Fear to Tread, 1905. For anyone who hasn't read it, what's the gist?
Well, even in this first book, you see Forster's big themes starting to emerge. It's about an English widow.
Okay.
She marries an Italian guy, which shocks her very proper English family back home.
Ah, the culture clash.
Exactly. And when she dies, the English relatives rush over to Italy to try and, well, rescue her baby, bring him back to England.
Oh dear, sounds like trouble.
It is. It explores that clash beautifully, the sort of stiffness of the English social code versus a more maybe spontaneous Italian way of life, and how family interference can be pretty destructive.
Classic Forster themes right from the start then.
Definitely. Cultural misunderstanding, the constraints of English society.
And then, of course, he wasn't just a novelist. The quiz brings up aspects of the novel from 1927.
Oh, yes, the Cambridge lectures.
Not fiction, this one, but hugely important for literary criticism.
Oh, massively. It's still a foundational text. And what makes it so good is that it's a novelist talking about how novels work from the inside.
So what kind of things does he cover?
He talks about the basic building blocks. He makes that famous distinction between story, just the sequence of events, The king died and then the queen died.
Right.
And plot, which is about why things happen, the cause and effect. The king died and then the queen died of grief. That's plot.
Okay, that makes sense.
And he talks about characters as famous flat versus round characters.
Right. Flat characters being simpler, maybe stereotypes, and round being more complex, evolving.
Exactly. Flat characters are recognizable, consistent, maybe serve a specific function. Round characters can surprise you. They have depth. They change. Think of someone like Mrs. Micawber as flat, maybe, and someone like Elizabeth Bennet as round.
Got it. What else?
He looks at things like fantasy, prophecy, pattern, rhythm in fiction. Just a really insightful look at the novelist's toolkit. Still worth reading for anyone interested in fiction.
And he makes that striking comparison in the book, liking a novel to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony.
Yes, that's a great point.
What's the significance of that comparison?
Well, linking it back to his vision for the novel, comparing it to the Ninth really underlines his belief that the novel could be this grand, complex art form.
Right, not just simple storytelling.
Exactly. Capable of immense emotional depth, intellectual complexity, intricate structure, like a great symphony with all its interwoven themes and movements.
Powerful idea. Okay, and then we get to what many consider his masterpiece, Howard's End, from 1910.
A really pivotal work.
This one feels broader, brings in more characters, tackles the social fabric more directly.
It does. It's more ambitious, more layered. You've got these three key groups whose lives intersect.
Who are they?
There are the Schlegel sisters, Margaret and Helen. They're intellectual, idealistic, quite bohemian.
Okay.
Then you have the Wilcox family, wealthy, practical, business-minded, very much rooted in the material world.
A contrast there.
Big contrast. And then there's the Basts, Leonard and Jackie, lower middle class, struggling, trying to improve themselves culturally.
So it's really about class and connection.
Absolutely. It digs deep into social class in Edwardian England, the huge divides, and the real difficulty of making genuine connections across those divides.
And Helen Schlegel, she's quite central, isn't she? The more passionate one.
Yes. Helen's idealism and her sometimes impulsive actions drive a lot of the plot. And the novel's famous motto, only connect.
Ah, yes. Only connect the prose and the passion.
And both will be exalted. That phrase just captures Forster's central plea, doesn't it? The need to bridge the gaps between the head and the heart, between different people, different classes.
A message that still feels incredibly relevant.
It really does. That struggle to connect, to overcome the barriers that isolate us, it's timeless, really.
Okay, so moving on from Forster, the quiz branches out to some of his contemporaries. First up, Aldous Huxley.
Right.
Starting with his first novel, Chrome Yellow, 1921, which the quiz notes is satirical.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see where Huxley started compared to where he ended up.
How so?
Chrome Yellow is really sharp, very funny. It's basically a send-up of the intellectual and artistic set of the time.
Set at one of those country house parties.
Exactly, full of characters who are writers, artists, thinkers, all talking endlessly, often quite pretentiously. Huxley uses it to poke fun at their ideas and lifestyles. Witty social commentary.
Which is quite a shift in tone from his most famous book, Brave New World, just over a decade later, 1932.
A massive shift. Brave New World is anything but witty satire. It's chilling.
It really is. Still feels incredibly prescient today.
Absolutely. It presents this vision of a future society engineered for stability and happiness.
But at a cost.
At a huge cost. Technology, conditioning, they control everything. Individuality, real emotions, critical thought, all sacrificed for social harmony.
It's that trade-off that's so disturbing.
Precisely. Its power lies in how it foresaw the potential dangers of technology used for social control, the manipulation of human nature. It's a warning that just doesn't seem to fade. Quite a journey for one writer.
From satirist to prophet of dystopia. Okay, then a very different kind of writer. T.F. Powys.
Ah, yes. A more unusual figure.
The quiz mentions his novel Wolf Solent from 1929 and notes his style is quite unique, rural settings mixed with allegory.
That's a good way to put it. Powys isn't as widely read now, perhaps, but he had this very distinctive voice.
So what's Wolf Solent about?
It follows the main character, Wolf Solent, as he moves to the countryside and gets entangled with the strange, often quite dark lives of the people there. It feels grounded in a real place, but it's exploring these bigger themes.
Like good and evil.
Exactly. Good, evil, innocence, corruption, often in a quite unsettling symbolic way. It's a blend of realism and something more mystical or allegorical.
And the quiz makes a connection between Powys and John Bunyan, author of The Pilgrim's Progress, because of the allegory.
Yes, the link.
Yeah.
Just like Bunyan used his story to represent a spiritual journey.
Right.
Powys often uses his seemingly simple rural tales and characters to explore deep religious and moral questions. Think of Mr. Weston's Good Wine, which was another option in your quiz and often seen as his best-known work. God basically turns up as a wine merchant in a small village.
Okay, so the Bunyan comparison makes sense then, using allegory in a kind of plain style.
Exactly. Very fitting.
Right. Finally, we get to Ivy Compton-Burnett, and there's a slight confusion in the quiz about her first novel.
Yes, the Dolores versus Pastors and Masters point.
It mentions Dolores, but suggests Pastors and Masters is more significant. Can you clear that up?
Sure. It's really about when her unique style emerged. Dolores was published much earlier, but under a pseudonym, and it's not really typical of her later work.
Okay.
Pastors and Masters, which came out in 1925, is generally seen as the first novel where she really hit her stride, established that signature style she's famous for.
And what is that signature style?
It's dialogue. Her novels are almost entirely made up of conversations.
Really? Just dialogue?
Pretty much. Set in these rather claustrophobic upper-class English households, usually late Victorian or Edwardian era, say, roughly 1885 to the early 1910s.
And the quiz highlights her technical brilliance. What does that refer to?
It refers to her incredible skill with that dialogue. It seems very formal, very precise on the surface.
But underneath?
Underneath, she uses it brilliantly to reveal all the hidden stuff, the power dynamics, the unspoken tensions, the secrets, the often quite shocking cruelty lurking beneath the polite facade.
So the dialogue does all the work, plot, character, theme.
Exactly. The way she exposes the psychological depths and advances the story purely through what people say and sometimes what they don't say. It's remarkable. That's the technical mastery everyone admires.
Wow. Okay, so stepping back and looking at all this quiz, seemingly just a set of questions, has actually opened up quite a window, hasn't it?
It really has. Onto the intellectual world of, late 19th, early 20th century Britain?
Yeah, you see these fascinating lines connecting philosophy, social commentary, and how the novel itself was changing.
Definitely. And it makes you think, doesn't it? How relevant are Balfour's questions about the limits of knowledge today in our age of big data and AI?
Good question. And Forster's focus on social division and the need to connect?
Still feels incredibly urgent, right? In so many ways.
And what about Compton-Burnett's style, that intense focus on dialogue? What makes that so enduringly fascinating? Why does it still grab critics and readers?
It's that precision, I think. The way language reveals and conceals at the same time.
So, here's a final thought, maybe. Could the quiz format itself? You know, questions, answers, trying to pin things down, categorize. Could that structure mirror something deeper? Like our ongoing human drive to understand the world, to make sense of it all, just like these authors were doing in their own ways.
That's an interesting thought to end on. The very act of asking and answering, reflecting that fundamental quest for knowledge.
Something to ponder. Thanks for sharing this quiz. It really sparked quite the exploration.
My pleasure. It's fun to dive in.